Pictures at 13, The Little Horn, Part 2. Speak great words against the Most High. The Pope and God are the same, so he has all power in heaven and earth, Pope Pius V said, and quoted here. The Pope is as it were God on earth, sole sovereign of the faithful of Christ. Concerning the extent of papal dignity, authority or dominion and infallibility. 2 Thessalonians 2:3 Let no man deceive you by any means. Speaking of the dark ages, for that day shall come, except there shall come a falling away first, and the man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposeth and exalteth himself above that which is called God, or that is worship, so that he, as God, sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. A striking illustration of the tyrannical character of this advocate of infallibility was given in his treatment of German Emperor Henry IV. For presuming to disregard the Pope's authority, this monarch was declared to be excommunicated and dethroned. Terrified by the desertion and threats of his own princes, who were encouraged in rebellion against him by the papal mandate, Henry felt the necessity of making his peace with Rome. In company with his wife and a faithful servant, he crossed the Alps in midwinter, that he might humble himself before the Pope. Upon reaching the castle whither Gregory had withdrawn, he was conducted without his guards into the outer court, and there, in the severe cold of winter, with uncovered head and naked feet, and in a miserable dress, he awaited the Pope's permission to come into his presence. Not until he had continued 3 days fasting and making confession did the Pontiff concede to grant him pardon. Even then, it was only upon condition that the Emperor should await the sanction of the Pope before resuming the insignia or exercising the power of royalty. And Gregory, elated with his triumph, boasted that it was his duty to pull down the pride of kings. How striking the contrast between the overbearing pride of this haughty pontiff and the meekness and gentleness of Christ, who represented himself as pleading at the door of the heart for admittance, that he may come in to bring pardon and peace, and who taught his disciples, whosoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Mark 12:27 He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. Ye therefore do greatly err. The papacy believed it had the keys to heaven and hell, by which this is represented. Nothing could be further from the truth. Defining blasphemy. Now, did not Christ have a right to call himself God? Because in Colossians it says, Christ created all things. Colossians 1. All things were given in his hands. By all things, all worlds, the people of this world, the things in this world, were created by Jesus Christ. And this power was given to him by the Father. So life did not exist without Christ. Also, when on earth he displayed his power to create or to heal. Now, there was a man who was sick of the palsy, and friends were with this man because they could not get close to Christ because of the crowd. They decided to take the tiles out on the roof and lower this man down. When Christ saw the faith of this man, he said, Son, thy sins be forgiven thee. Certain of the rabbis, or the scribes, was reasoning in their hearts when they heard this, how can this man speak this blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God only? And when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they so reasoned within themselves, he said unto them, Why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether it is easier to say to the sick of the palsy, Thy sin be forgiven thee, or to say, Arise and take up thy bed and walk, and that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins. He said to the sick of the palsy, I say unto thee, Arise and take up thy bed, and go thy way into thine house. And immediately he arose, took up the bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, We never saw it on this fashion. Now the priests on earth take on the role of Christ. Christ had that divine right given him of his Father, but no priest but that of Jesus Christ had that divine right. Matthew 23 verse 9 says, And call no man your father. The confessional, the use of a human priest to confess sins, is not God's directive, and confessions of the world were used to gather information as a powerful tool for control. Jesuit secret army of the papacy. Detail of the assassination attempt on Queen Elizabeth I was allegedly known by the principal Jesuit of England, Father Henry Garnet. Although Garnet was convicted and sentenced to death, doubt has been cast on how much he really knew of the plot. As its existence was revealed to him through confession, Garnet was prevented from informing the authorities by the absolute confidentiality of the confessional. In fact, during the 16th century, confession had become a religious duty which had to be diligently observed. Ignatius, the head of the Jesuits, considered it most important and recommended to his disciples that as many of the faithful as possible should observe it regularly. The results of this method were extraordinary. The Jesuit confessors soon enjoyed everywhere the same consideration shown to the Jesuit professors, and the confessional was considered by all as the symbol of the order's power and activity. If a husband asked his adulterous wife if she had broken the conjugal contract, she can say no without hesitation, as that contract still exists. Once she has obtained absolution at the confessional, she can say, I am without sin, if while she says it, she thinks of that absolution which took the load of her sin. If a husband is still incredulous, she can reassure him by saying that she has not committed. Priesthood of ancient Rome. Priestcraft, the true sacrificial service given by God, was adulterated by paganism, but designed to mimic and bring confusion as Lucifer intended. Paganism has always fought against God's church, whether Jewish or Christian. Familiar pagan occult symbols found in the church: the Sacred Heart, the sacred number of astrology 666, solar wheels, discs and crests, symbols of the sun and sun worship, figures to represent the departure of the spirit from the body, tiara, symbol of the cosmic rulership, the mitre, rosemary beads, the sexual occult symbols, the divining rods. And down to the end of his life, Constantine retained the title and dignity of Pontifex Maximus, or High Priest of the heathen hierarchy. His coins bore on the one side the letters of the name of Christ, on the other the figure of the sun god, and the inscription of Sol Invictus. The pagan Babylonian priests had a chief priest who held the title Pontifex Maximus. Translated to Latin, meant that he was the head pagan priest. This is the name that the Pope is called by. 1 Timothy 2:4, who will have all men to be saved and come unto a knowledge of the truth. Where is Christ? Now these things we have spoken, this is the sum. He'd already been speaking about the ministry of Christ up to this point of chapter 8. In Hebrews, we have such a high priest who is set on the right hand of the throne of the majesty in the heavens, a minister of the sanctuary of the true tabernacle which the Lord pitched. The mediation of these precious children was not left to man. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High. The destruction of even one human life can never be justified in terms of the benefit that it might conceivably bring to another, said Pope Benedict. John 16:2, They shall put you out of the synagogues, yea, the time cometh that whosoever killeth you will think they doeth God's service, and these things will they do unto you, because they have not known the Father nor me. Synod of Verona, held in 1184 under the auspices of Pope Lucius III. It is most notable for the condemning of the Waldenses under the charge of witchcraft. The charge was later amended to include heresy. Thinking truth was a capital offence. From the birthplace of Popery in 606 to the present time, it is estimated by careful and credible historians that more than 50 million of the human family have been slaughtered for the crime of heresy by popish persecutors, an average of more than 40,000 religious murders for every year of the existence of Popery. The Jesuit Sanders himself confesses that an innumerable multitude of Loyolads, followers of John Wycliffe, and Sacramentarians, groups of Christians who denied Catholic transubstantiation, were burnt throughout all Europe, who yet, he says, were not put to death by the Pope and bishops, but by the civil magistrates. The Catholic historian Vigerius admits gleefully that during the pontificate of Pope Paul IV, the Inquisition alone, by torture, starvation, or fire, murdered more than 150,000 Protestants. No secret could be withheld by the inquisitors. Hundreds of persons were often apprehended in one day, and in consequence of information resulting from their examinations under torture, thousands more were apprehended. Prisons, convents, even private houses were crowded with victims. The cells of the Inquisition were filled and emptied again and again. Its torture chamber was a hell. Lime pits. Notice these words by Spurgeon. Wandering in a labyrinth of the most fearful prisons, which may be called graves for the living, I came to a cell full of skeletons without skulls, buried in lime. The skulls detached from their bodies had been collected in a hamper by the first visitors. Whose were these skeletons, and why were they buried in that place and in that manner? The following is the most probable opinion, if not be rather the history of the fact. The condemned were immersed in a bath of slacked lime, gradually filled up to their necks. The lime, by little and little, enclosed the sufferers or walled them up alive. The torment was extreme but slow. As the lime rose higher and higher, the respiration of the victims became more painful because more difficult, so that with the suffocation of the smoke and the anguish of a compressed breathing, they died in a manner most horrible and desperate. Some time after their death, the heads would naturally separate from the bodies and roll away into the hollows left by the shrinking of the lime. Any other explanation of the fact that may be attempted will be found improbable and unnatural. The Inquisition by C.H. Spurgeon. Pope Innocent III. Where do they come up with these names? Innocent, pious, self-appointed names. Pope Innocent III. While many people associate the Inquisition with Spain and Portugal, it was actually instituted by Pope Innocent III, 1198 to 1216 in Rome. A later pope, Pope Gregory IX, he established the Inquisition in 1233 to combat the heresy of the Albigenses, a religious sect in France. By 1255, the Inquisition was in full gear throughout Central and Western Europe, although it was never instituted in England or Scandinavia. 1542. Inquisition, the torture of the most hideous kind. The Roman Inquisition had been administered since 1542 by the Jesuits, so they took over from the Dominicans. The Jesuit order was recognized by the Roman Catholic faith on the feast day of Assumption of Mary, which falls on August 15, 1534. Birthplace is France, and the general of the order, called the Black Pope, the head of the order, and is often referred to as the most powerful man on earth. The preserved head of St. Oliver Plunkett is still at the altar in St. Peter's Church. It's in Ireland. The site of an altar with a skull in its centre is another example of the pagan practice of Roman Catholics worshipping the dead. The Capuchin Crypt, described by a traveller's guide as one of the most horrifying images in all of Christendom. Where the monks arrived at the church in 1631, they brought 300 cartloads of deceased friars. Friar Michael of Bergamo oversaw the arrangement of the bones in the burial crypt. The soil in the crypt was brought from Jerusalem by order of Pope Urban. So the Pope was an overseer of this project. Not many spend their life work in such a way on dead man's bones, but the papacy somehow had an interest in this. By the time Protestantism had arrived, the light of the Waldenses had almost been extinguished because of the slaughter by the soldiers of Rome. On this papal print we have the crusade against the Waldenses. Doesn't look like it's a few people involved. You can see it's a war involving many people. Pope Gregory the 13th Huguenot Massacre Medal. They were proud of their escapades, which were put down on print or onto coin, which was to their shame, but because they were under a satanic influence, they meant it to their glory, but they will yet meet the judgment. Where is the flame that Latimer and Ridley lit? Has it been forgotten? Where is Protestantism today? Has it been taken over by the ideas of Romanism, reshaped to the model that it wanted it to be? A sister of Babylon. That's how the Bible describes. It says, come out of Babylon. It speaks of Babylon and her daughters. God calls for repentance, out of the confusion, towards the commandments of God, towards the Bible in its pure teaching. We briefly notice the mock disputation which Ridley, Latimer and Cranmer were compelled to hold with the Roman Catholic Commission at Oxford in September 1554. The Commission pronounced all three obstinate heretics and sentenced them to be burned. In October of the following year, an order was issued for the execution of Ridley and Latimer. The night before his death, Ridley supped with the family of the Mayor of Oxford. At the table, no shade of the stake darkened his face or saddened his talk. He invited the hostess to his heavenly marriage. Her reply was a burst of tears, for which he chid her as if she were unwilling to be present at so joyous occasion. The place of execution was a ditch by the north wall of the town of Oxford. On his way to the stake, Ridley saw Latimer following him, the old man making what haste he could. Ridley ran and, folding him in his arms, kissed him, saying, "Be of good heart, brother, for God will either save us from the fury of the flames, or else strengthen us to abide it." They kneeled down and prayed, each by himself, and afterwards they talked together a little while. But what they said, says Fox, I cannot learn of no man. After the sermon usual on such occasions, they both undressed for the fire. The men themselves. An iron chain had been put around the martyrs and a staple driven in to make it firm. The two were fastened to one stake. A lighted faggot was brought and laid at Ridley's feet. Then Latimer addressed his company in words still fresh, after 4 centuries, as on the day in which they were uttered. Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out. This man was appealing to England, to the future generations at this very point of time. What compromise England has had. How far it has gone from its roots. When under such trouble these men stood out and made England a different place. Forget not the words of this man. The flames blazed up rapidly and fiercely. Latimer bent towards them as if eager to embrace those ministers, terrible only in experience, which were to give him exit from a world of sorrow into the eternal bliss. Stroking his face with his hands, he speedily and with little pain departed. Not so Ridley. His sufferings were protracted and severe. The faggots piled high and solidly around him stifled the flames, and his lower extremities were burned, while the upper part of his body were untouched, and his on one side were hardly scorched. I cannot burn, he cried. Let the fire come to me. At last he was understood. The upper faggots were pulled away. The flame rose. Ridley leaned towards them and cried, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. His body turned over the iron chain, the legs being already consumed, and he fell at Latimer's feet. There was a studied effort to burn a man as slow as possible, and could take up to 3/4 of an hour to die. The words again, be of good cheer, Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day, by God's grace, light such a candle in England as I trust will never be put out. How far away have the people of England gone from the Reformation? God is calling you again to take a stand. Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of England. As for the Pope, I refuse him as Christ's enemy and the Antichrist with all his false doctrines. This and the justification by faith is the essence of the Reformation. Many people know the name of Luther, but they're not so familiar with St. Petrus Canisius, who was a Jesuit who fought against the spread of Protestantism in Germany, Austria, Bohemia, Czech Republic, and Switzerland, and was given a sainthood by the Church for it. The restoration of Catholicism in Germany after the Reformation is attributed to his work. So, following on the heels of Luther and the Reformers comes the Jesuits. The name Protestant was first used by the Lutheran party in 1529 when they formally protested a decree of the Emperor Charles V and the Diet of Spires. To what country of Europe shall we turn where we are not able to track the Jesuit by his bloody footprint? Note, these are the words from Wiley, a Protestant reformer himself. What page of modern history shall we open and not read fresh proofs that the papal doctrine of killing excommunicated kings was not meant to slumber in forgotten tombs, but to be acted out in the living world? We shall see Henry III falling by his dagger. Henry IV perishes by the same consecrated weapon. The King of Portugal dies by their order. The great Prince of Orange is dispatched by their agent, shot down at the door of his own dining room. How many assassins they sent to England to murder Elizabeth, history attests. That she escaped their munitions is one of the marvels of history. Nor is it only the palaces of monarchs into which they have crept with their doctrines of murder and assassination. The very sanctuary of their own popes they have defiled with blood. We behold Clement the 14th signing the order for the banishment of the Jesuits, and soon thereafter he is overtaken by their vengeance and dies by poison. In the gunpowder plot we see them deliberately planning to destroy at one blow the nobility and gentry of England. To them we owe those civil wars which for so many years drenched with blood the fair provinces of France. They laid the train of what crowning horror was the St. Bartholomew massacre. Should we say that those civil unrests and wars that have been waged across the world were not due to their teachings, to their presence, and from their plots at this very point of time? The 30-Year War had started as a religious war. It ended as a political war. It resulted in the death of 10 to 20 million. Jesuit-educated Ferdinand II started it with the purpose of crushing Protestantism. Over and over again we see that a religious war becomes a political war. And it seems to be, for the most part, from the same source. Speaking of the persecutions in Germany after 1630, the cruelties used by the imperial troops under Count Tilly in Saxony are thus enumerated. It talks here about the methods in which people died: hanging, stifling, roasting, stabbing, frying, breaking the bones, rasping of flesh, tearing with wild horses, drowning, strangling, burning, boiling, poisoning, cutting off tongue, ear, nose, etc., sawing off limbs, hacking to pieces, drawing by the heels through the streets. These enormous cruelties will be a perpetual stain on the memory of Count Tilly, who not only permitted but even commanded his troops to put them in practice. Wherever he came, the most horrid barbarities and cruel depredations ensued, so that the full result of his conquests were murder, poverty, and desolation. The Roman Catholic Church discouragement of cremation stems from several ideas. The body is an instrument through which the sacraments are received. It is itself sacramental. Second, that it is an integral part of the human person, should be disposed of in a way that honours and reverences it. And many early practices involved with disposal of dead bodies were viewed as pagan in origin or an insult to the body. And third, that it constituted a denial of the resurrection of the body. I want to note that particularly. The Papists have failed to work their will with Wycliffe during his life, and their hatred could not be satisfied while his body rested quietly in the grave. By the decree of a Council of Constance, more than 40 years after his death, his bones were exhumed and publicly burned, and the ashes were thrown into a neighbouring brook. It was for spite. It was that this man was to be eternally lost that they did this act. It was an act of revenge. The brook, says an old writer, did convey his ashes into Avon, Avon into the Severn, Severn into the narrow seas, and they into the main ocean. And thus the ashes of Wycliffe are the emblem of his doctrine, which now is dispersed all over the world. Little did his enemies realize the significance of this malicious act. Here is another barbaric act of which the prophecy spoke: he shall wear out the saints of the Most High, pointing to that little horn power. Do you think God would let this go in history? The work and insult against truth and his saints? St. Bartholomew massacre. The King of France, urged on by the Romish priests and prelates, lent his sanction to the dreadful work. The great bell of the palace, tolling at the dead of midnight, was a signal for the slaughter. Protestants by thousands, sleeping quietly in their homes, trusting to the plighted honour of their king, were dragged forth without warning and murdered in cold blood. For Paris, the only hard figure is a payment by the city to the workmen for collecting and burying 1,100 bodies washed up on the banks of the Seine, downstream from the city, in 1 week. The rivers were running red with blood. Many political people were horrified, but many Catholics inside and outside France regarded the massacre, at least initially, as deliverance from an imminent threat, a coup by the Huguenots. We could liken this to an event in Latin America where innocent people died. An excuse was made for what happened. The severed head of Coligny was apparently dispatched to Pope Gregory XIII, though it got no further than Lyons, and the Pope sent the king a golden rose. He ordered a song of thanksgiving, which continued to be a practice for many years as a commemoration, and he had a medal struck, which we saw, celebrating the slaughter of the Huguenots in 1572, showing an angel bearing a cross and a sword next to the slaughtered Protestants. On hearing of the slaughter, Philip II of Spain laughed for the only time in record, so we're told, and Elizabeth I, ambassador to France at that time, barely escaped with his life. How long before the judgment? Revelation 6:9-11. And when he had opened the fifth seal, I saw under the altar the souls of them that were slain for the word of God and for the testimony which they held. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, doth thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth? Seems unjust, but God is merciful to try and save all. And white robes were given unto every one of them. And it was said unto them, that they should rest yet a little season, until their fellow servants also, and their brethren, that should be killed as they were, should be fulfilled.